Get on your knees. Officer Daniel Harper's voice cut through the afternoon air so sharply that even the birds scattered from the pine trees bordering the empty lot. The flashing red and blue lights reflected across the dusty gravel road, painting the scene in restless colors as a warm North Carolina wind carried loose leaves across the ground. In the center of it all stood Ava Brooks. The 38-year-old black woman didn't move. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Her weathered denim jacket shifted slightly in the breeze as she stood beside her aging dark green SUV, her eyes calm despite the growing circle of police vehicles surrounding her. 3 patrol cars blocked the narrow road ahead. Another sat behind her. Officers stepped out one by one, hands resting near their equipment, faces tense with uncertainty. The entire scene felt wrong, like a puzzle assembled with pieces from different boxes. Harper took another step forward. His jaw was tight. A radio crackled on his shoulder. "Ma'am, keep your hands where I can see them," he said. Ava slowly lifted her hands away from her sides. "They're visible," she replied quietly. Her voice carried none of the fear the officers expected to hear. That unsettled Harper more than he wanted to admit. Most people surrounded by police asked questions. Most people protested. Most people demanded explanations. Ava Brooks simply stood there beneath the late afternoon sun as though she were waiting for a bus. The silence stretched across the clearing. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called from the tree line. Harper glanced toward the SUV. The vehicle matched the description given by witnesses earlier that day. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong vehicle. Yet every detail had pointed them here. A nearby deputy shifted uneasily. "You sure this is her?" he muttered. Harper ignored him. His eyes stayed locked on Ava. "Do you live out here alone?" he asked. "Yes." "Anyone else on the property?" Ava hesitated for only a second. "Not exactly." Harper frowned. "What does that mean?" For the first time, Ava glanced beyond the officers toward the dense wall of pines behind them. The movement was subtle, barely noticeable, yet something about it made Harper turn as well. Nothing was there. Only trees stretching across several acres of private land. The wind whispered through the branches. Dry needles drifted toward the ground. "Ma'am," Harper said firmly. "Keep your attention on me." Ava looked back at him. "Officer, please." Her voice remained steady. "Don't make sudden movements." Harper's expression hardened. "Then cooperate." Another uneasy silence followed. The afternoon heat shimmered above the gravel road. A bead of sweat rolled down one deputy's forehead. Somewhere far beyond the trees, hidden from sight, a faint metallic sound echoed through the forest. Clink, clink, clink. Several officers exchanged glances. Harper's eyes narrowed. What was that? Nobody answered. Then it came again. Clink, 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 like chains moving somewhere deep among the pines. Ava closed her eyes briefly, almost sadly. "They're coming," she whispered. Harper's pulse quickened. "Who's coming?" Ava opened her eyes. Before she could answer, a single bark exploded from the forest. Deep, powerful, unmistakable. Every officer froze. The sound rolled through the trees like distant thunder. Then a second bark followed, and a third. Closer now, much closer. The radios fell silent. The wind seemed to stop. Even Harper's breathing slowed as something moved rapidly beyond the tree line. Branches shook. Pine needles scattered across the ground. And suddenly, for reasons he couldn't explain, Officer Daniel Harper felt the color drain from his face. Because he recognized that bark. The barking continued to echo through the trees, but Ava Brooks did not even flinch. The officers remained frozen, their eyes fixed on the dark forest beyond the gravel road. Officer Harper swallowed hard as another deep bark rolled through the pines. There was something familiar about it, something he could not place. The sound carried authority, discipline, and years of training. It was not the random barking of a household pet. It sounded like a command given shape and voice. Ava lowered her hand slowly. "Please stay calm," she said. Her tone was gentle, almost protective. One deputy glanced at Harper. "You know those dogs?" Harper did not answer immediately. His eyes remained locked on the tree line. The question lingered in the warm afternoon air. The truth was that he had heard stories. Everyone in the county had. Stories about a woman who lived alone on 70 acres of wooded land outside town. Stories about retired military dogs. Stories about animals that had served overseas before disappearing from official records. Most people dismissed those stories as small-town legends. Harper had dismissed them too. Until now, the movement in the trees suddenly stopped. The barking ceased. Silence settled across the clearing once again. Ava exhaled slowly. Her gaze softened. For the first time since the police arrived, a faint smile touched her face. It was the kind of smile someone gave when hearing familiar footsteps approaching home. Several years earlier, her life had looked completely different. Back then, Ava had spent her mornings on military training grounds instead of quiet farmland. She had worked alongside highly trained canine units, preparing them for difficult assignments that demanded discipline, patience, and trust. While other people saw dogs, Ava saw partners. Every animal under her care had a name, a history, and a purpose. She learned their personalities. She learned their fears. Most importantly, she learned how to earn their trust. Trust was never given freely. It had to be built one day at a time. After leaving military service, Ava discovered that many retired working dogs faced uncertain futures. Some found homes. Others did not. The realization haunted her. She could not forget the animals that had stood beside service members through years of demanding work. So she used her savings to buy land. The property had once belonged to an aging farmer who could no longer maintain it. The old farmhouse needed repairs. The fences needed replacing. The barns leaked whenever it rained. None of that mattered to Ava. She saw potential where others saw problems. Over time, the property became a sanctuary. One by one, retired military dogs arrived. Some were older. Some carried emotional scars from difficult experiences. Some had been overlooked simply because nobody understood them. Ava welcomed every one of them. The townspeople eventually started calling her the dog lady. Children waved when they passed her truck. Neighbors occasionally brought supplies. Yet very few people knew the full story. Very few knew how many nights Ava spent sitting beside frightened animals until they felt safe again. Very few knew how many lives those dogs had touched before arriving at her farm. Harper knew none of that as he stood on the gravel road. To him, she was still a suspicious woman connected to a vehicle that matched a witness description. But somewhere beyond the trees, something was approaching. And whatever it was, Ava Brooks seemed completely unafraid. The tension hanging over the gravel road had started long before the officers arrived at Ava Brooks's property. Earlier that morning, just after 8 o'clock, a regional bank 20 miles away reported a suspicious incident involving a customer who had abruptly left the parking lot after triggering concern among staff. Witnesses remembered only fragments. A dark-colored sport utility vehicle. A woman driving alone. A route heading north toward the county line. By lunchtime, those fragments had grown into assumptions. Assumptions became reports. Reports became alerts. And alerts eventually reached Officer Daniel Harper's patrol car. Harper had built a reputation for acting quickly. Some people admired that quality. Others believed it sometimes pushed him toward conclusions before all the facts were available. When the vehicle description appeared on his mobile computer, he immediately began searching rural roads throughout the county. Nearly an hour later, he spotted Ava's aging SUV traveling along a narrow highway bordered by farmland and pine forests. The color was similar. The model was similar. The timing seemed close enough. For Harper, that was enough reason to investigate. What he did not know was that Ava had spent her morning doing something entirely different. Before sunrise, she had loaded bags of dog food into the back of her vehicle. She had driven nearly 40 miles to pick up veterinary supplies from a neighboring county. One of the older dogs on her property needed medication for arthritis. Another required a special nutritional supplement. The receipts still sat inside a paper bag on the passenger seat. The supplies remained unopened in the rear cargo area. None of it looked suspicious. None of it matched the growing narrative unfolding inside Harper's mind. Yet by the time he activated his emergency lights and followed her toward the property, the situation had already developed a momentum of its own. Additional deputies responded. Dispatch relayed updates. Questions multiplied faster than answers. Now, standing beneath the afternoon sun, Harper felt the weight of every pair of eyes around him. The younger deputies watched him for direction. The radios crackled with requests for updates. Nobody wanted to be the first person to admit uncertainty. Across from them, Ava remained calm. Her gaze drifted once more toward the forest. The expression on her face puzzled Harper. It was not fear. It was not anger. It almost looked like concern. Not for herself. For something else. "Ma'am," Harper said carefully. If there is anyone else on this property, now would be the time to tell us. Ava nodded slightly. There are several. Several. The word immediately tightened the atmosphere again. One deputy shifted his footing. Another glanced toward the woods. People? Harper asked. Ava looked directly at him. Family. The answer confused him. County records listed no relatives living on the property. No spouse. No children. No permanent residents besides Ava herself. Before he could ask another question, movement appeared between the trees. Branches swayed. Pine needles fluttered to the forest floor. A shadow emerged from the darkness beneath the canopy. Then another. Then another. The deputies instinctively stepped closer together. The sounds of chains and tags softly clinking against collars drifted through the still air. Ava's shoulders relaxed for the first time all afternoon. A faint warmth entered her eyes. Whatever was approaching, she had been expecting it all along. Harper stared at the tree line, his pulse quickening as four large figures slowly stepped into view beneath the golden afternoon light. The four dogs moved out of the forest with quiet confidence, their paws barely disturbing the layer of pine needles beneath them. Sunlight filtered through the trees and reflected off dark coats that looked almost polished beneath the afternoon glow. They were large animals, powerful but controlled, each wearing a weathered collar carrying metal tags that softly clicked with every step. The deputies watched in stunned silence. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The only sound came from the gentle breeze sliding through the branches overhead. Ava Brooks lowered her hands completely and took a slow breath. The tension that had surrounded her moments earlier seemed to dissolve. Easy, she said softly. The dogs immediately slowed their pace. The response was instant. Precise. Almost effortless. Officer Harper noticed it immediately. These were not ordinary pets. Their discipline was impossible to ignore. One deputy quietly muttered, "I have never seen dogs respond like that." Harper did not answer. His attention remained fixed on the largest dog leading the group. The animal's posture carried unusual confidence. Age had added streaks of silver around its muzzle, but nothing about its movements suggested weakness. The dog scanned the officers briefly before directing its attention entirely toward Ava. It was a look of complete trust, the kind built over years rather than months. Ava took a step forward. The dogs closed the remaining distance. To the surprise of everyone present, they did not show interest in the police vehicles, flashing lights, or gathering officers. They moved directly to Ava. One sat beside her left leg. Another settled near her right side. The remaining two positioned themselves nearby as if following a routine practiced countless times before. The scene felt strangely peaceful. Harper glanced toward the younger deputies. Their earlier nervousness had begun to shift into curiosity. One officer lowered his shoulders. Another slowly exhaled. The atmosphere that had felt ready to snap now felt suspended in uncertainty. "These are the others on your property?" Harper finally asked. Ava nodded. "Yes." "You call them family?" Her expression softened. "I do." Harper looked again at the dogs. The answer somehow made sense. The years had left their marks on each animal. Small scars, graying fur, worn collars, signs of lives fully lived. Yet they remained attentive to every word Ava spoke. One of the dogs rested its head lightly against her hand. Ava instinctively scratched behind its ear. The animal closed its eyes for a brief moment, completely relaxed. Harper found himself unexpectedly uncomfortable. Not because of the dogs, because of the realization that none of this matched the image he had built in his mind earlier that day. Suspicion had painted Ava as someone secretive, someone potentially hiding something. Yet standing before him was a woman whose first concern appeared to be the well-being of four aging dogs. The contradiction bothered him. A radio crackled suddenly on a deputy's shoulder. The burst of sound caused one younger dog to lift its head. Ava immediately spoke. "It is okay." The dog relaxed again. Harper watched the interaction carefully. There was no hesitation between command and response. Years of trust moved silently between them. Then something caught his eye. Attached to the largest dog's collar hung a faded metal tag unlike the others. It reflected a brief flash of sunlight as the dog shifted position. Harper narrowed his eyes. The shape looked familiar. Military issue. His stomach tightened slightly. The realization arrived before he could stop it. These animals had not simply been trained. They had served. And judging by the age of the largest dog, One of them might have a history far more significant than anyone standing on that gravel road yet understood. The moment Harper noticed the tag, something shifted inside him. He took a cautious step closer, his boots crunching softly against the gravel. The largest dog remained seated beside Ava, calm and motionless, watching him with alert but steady eyes. Sunlight glinted again across the worn metal hanging from its collar. Harper had seen tags like that before during joint training exercises years earlier. Not many, only enough to recognize that they belonged to a world far beyond ordinary pet ownership. "May I see that tag?" he asked. Ava glanced down at the dog before looking back at him. "You can look," she said quietly. "Just move slowly. He is retired, but he still pays attention to everything." Harper nodded. For the first time since arriving, he followed her instructions without argument. As he stepped closer, another deputy moved beside him. The younger officer leaned forward and squinted at the weathered engraving. Dust covered part of the surface. Years of rain and sunlight had faded the lettering. Harper crouched slightly. Then he saw it. A serial number. An official designation. And beneath it, a single name. Rex. The name struck him immediately. His eyes widened. "No way," he whispered. The deputy beside him frowned. "What?" Harper did not answer right away. He continued staring at the tag as though it might suddenly change. The name sounded familiar because it was familiar. Years ago, while attending a state law enforcement seminar, he had listened to a retired military instructor tell stories about exceptional canine teams. Most were impressive. One had become legendary. A dog named Rex. A dog known for extraordinary discipline and service. Harper remembered the story because everyone in the room remembered it. Yet according to everything he had heard, Rex had disappeared from public discussion years earlier. Some believed he had died. Others assumed he had quietly retired somewhere far away. Nobody seemed to know the truth. Until now. Harper slowly stood. "Rex?" he asked. Ava nodded once. The dog lifted his head at the sound of his name. "That is him." Several deputies exchanged confused glances. One officer pulled out a phone and began searching. Another stared at Rex as if seeing him for the first time. The atmosphere changed again. Suspicion gave way to uncertainty. Uncertainty began transforming into something closer to respect. Harper looked at Ava. "You never mentioned this." A faint smile crossed her face. Nobody asked. The answer left him speechless. A radio suddenly crackled to life. Dispatch was requesting an update. Harper grabbed the microphone attached to his shoulder, but hesitated before speaking. Earlier, he had been certain of almost everything. Now he was not certain of anything. He looked around at the scene. For retired military dogs resting peacefully. A quiet woman standing beside them. Veterinary supplies visible through the rear window of her SUV. No signs of wrongdoing. No signs of danger. Only assumptions. Lots of assumptions. Then another transmission came through the radio. This time the dispatcher's voice sounded different. More urgent. More precise. A pause followed. Harper listened carefully. As the new information arrived, the color slowly drained from his face. The original vehicle description from the bank had just been corrected. And suddenly, the entire reason they had surrounded Ava Brooks no longer matched her vehicle at all. The radio remained pressed against Harper's shoulder as the dispatcher's words echoed in his ears. For several long seconds he simply stood there, staring at nothing. The afternoon sunlight seemed brighter now, exposing details he had completely overlooked before. The dusty bags of veterinary supplies in Ava's vehicle. The water containers secured in the cargo area. The folded blankets visible through the rear window. None of it belonged to the story he had constructed in his mind. Around him, the deputies sensed the shift immediately. They had worked with Harper long enough to recognize when certainty disappeared. One officer quietly lowered his notebook. Another took a step back from the SUV. Nobody spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have. Ava remained exactly where she was. She did not demand an explanation. She did not ask for an apology. She simply rested her hand on Rex's neck while the old dog sat beside her beneath the warm afternoon sun. The forest behind them had grown quiet again. Pine branches swayed gently overhead. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a wind chime hanging from the farmhouse porch released a soft metallic melody. The sound drifted across the property and settled into the stillness. Harper finally lowered the radio. "The description was corrected," he said quietly. Nobody responded at first. "The vehicle they are looking for is a different model. Different color. Different registration state. The words felt strange coming out of his mouth. The younger deputies exchanged glances. One slowly exhaled. Another looked toward Ava and then quickly looked away. Embarrassment had entered the scene. Ava nodded once. Not triumphantly. Not sarcastically. Just a simple acknowledgement. Harper found that somehow harder to process than anger would have been. He had expected resistance. Instead, he found patience. He looked around the property. For the first time, he truly saw it. The old farmhouse stood at the end of a winding dirt path. Fresh repairs were visible on the roof. Several fenced areas stretched across the acreage, each carefully maintained. Stainless steel water stations reflected sunlight near the barns. Everything looked orderly, purposeful, loved. This was not the home of someone hiding from the world. It was the home of someone caring for it. One of the older dogs slowly rose and wandered a few feet away before settling into a patch of shade beneath an oak tree. Ava watched him with the attentive eyes of someone who knew exactly which joints hurt when the weather changed. His arthritis acts up when it gets hot, she said softly. Harper followed her gaze. That is why you drove to the neighboring county this morning? Ava nodded. The medication is cheaper there. The answer landed harder than he expected. For a moment, nobody said anything. The flashing lights continued reflecting across the gravel road, but they no longer felt urgent. They felt misplaced. A deputy quietly switched off one patrol car's light bar. Then another followed. The red and blue reflections disappeared one vehicle at a time until only sunlight remained. The atmosphere transformed completely. The old military dogs relaxed further. One stretched out on the grass. Another rested near Ava's boots. Rex remained seated beside her, calm and dignified. Harper stared at the aging dog. The legendary name still echoed in his memory. Yet what moved him most was not the reputation. It was the simple reality before him. An old service dog spending retirement beside the woman who refused to abandon him. As the wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and warm earth, a strange realization settled over the entire group. The most remarkable thing on this property was not the famous dog. It was the quiet woman standing beside him. The quiet lasted only a few minutes before another vehicle appeared at the far end of the road. Unlike the patrol cars, this one arrived without flashing lights. A dark government-issued SUV rolled slowly toward the property and stopped near the entrance gate. Every officer turned to look. The driver's door opened, and an older man stepped out carrying a slim folder beneath one arm. His gray hair reflected the afternoon sun, and his posture carried the calm confidence of someone accustomed to being listened to. Harper immediately recognized the insignia on the man's jacket. It belonged to a federal veterans outreach program that occasionally coordinated with retired military working dog organizations. The man walked toward the group, his eyes scanning the property until they settled on Rex. He stopped walking. For a moment, he simply stared. Then a smile spread across his face. "Well, I will be damned," he said softly. Ava nodded politely. "Good to see you again, Mr. Collins." Several deputies exchanged confused glances. Collins looked from Ava to the officers and then back again. "Do these gentlemen know who you are?" Harper shifted uncomfortably. "We are still figuring that out." Collins let out a small laugh. "Then you are missing quite a story." He opened the folder in his hands and carefully removed several documents. The pages were old but well preserved. Official seals covered the corners. Service records, certifications, commendations. Harper watched as Collins handed the file to him. "Read the name on the first page." Harper looked down. The first document listed Ava Brooks as a certified military canine handler. The second detailed years of service. The third contained recognition from multiple agencies for work involving retired service animals. Page after page revealed achievements Ava had never mentioned. Harper continued turning pages. The deeper he read, the quieter he became. What surprised him most was not the awards. It was what happened afterward. The records showed that Ava had personally adopted dogs that many organizations struggled to place after retirement. Animals requiring special care, expensive treatment, constant attention. Dogs most people admired from a distance, but never volunteered to support. Ava had done it without publicity, without interviews, without fundraising campaigns, without asking for recognition. Collins glanced toward Rex. "Most people know the dog's story," he said. "Very few know hers." The statement hung in the air. Even the deputies seemed embarrassed by how little they knew. One younger officer slowly removed his sunglasses and looked toward Ava with newfound respect. Harper closed the folder. The papers suddenly felt heavier than they should have. Across the property, golden afternoon lights stretched across the grass. The retired dogs rested peacefully, completely unaware that the mood around them had transformed. Then Collins pointed toward Rex. "There is one more thing you should know." Harper looked up. Collins smiled. "Everyone remembers Rex because of his service record. What nobody talks about is why he survived long enough to retire. That happened because Ava refused to leave him behind when others believed his career was over." Harper turned toward Ava. She looked away modestly, almost uncomfortable with the attention. Collins shook his head. "That woman spent years giving forgotten dogs a second chance." Silence followed. A deep, meaningful silence. For the first time that day, nobody saw Ava Brooks as a suspect. Nobody saw her as a name connected to a mistaken report. Standing beneath the warm Carolina sky, surrounded by the animals she had devoted her life to protecting, she looked exactly like what she had always been, a guardian. For several moments nobody moved. The late afternoon sun hung low above the tree line, casting long shadows across the property. Officer Daniel Harper stood with the folder still in his hands, feeling the weight of every assumption he had made that day. The pages inside documented years of service, sacrifice, and dedication. Yet none of them explained the quiet dignity with which Ava Brooks had endured being treated like a problem instead of a person. That realization troubled him more than anything else. A soft breeze moved across the field. The old oak leaves rustled overhead. Nearby, one of the retired dogs shifted comfortably in the grass and let out a contented sigh. The simple sound seemed to break the spell that had settled over the group. Harper slowly walked toward Ava. The gravel crunched beneath his boots. Every deputy watched. Collins watched. Even the dogs lifted their heads slightly as he approached. Ava remained calm. Her hand rested gently against Rex's shoulder. Harper stopped several feet away. For the first time all day, he removed his sunglasses completely. There was no authority in his posture now. No urgency. No assumptions. Only honesty. "Ms. Brooks," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology." The words hung in the air. Ava studied him for a moment, but said nothing. Harper took a slow breath. "We arrived here believing something that was not true. I arrived here believing something that was not true." He glanced briefly toward the patrol vehicles lined along the road. "I should have asked more questions before drawing conclusions." The younger deputies lowered their eyes. Several nodded slightly. They knew the apology was not only for Ava. It was for all of them. Ava looked toward the farmhouse in the distance. The sunlight reflected softly from the windows. After a moment she spoke. "Everybody makes mistakes, officer." Harper looked surprised. The answer was gentler than he deserved. "That does not make them harmless," she added quietly. The statement landed with quiet force. Harper nodded. "You are right." Silence returned. But this silence felt different. It no longer carried tension. It carried understanding. Collins smiled faintly and folded his arms. He had seen moments like this before. Moments when pride stepped aside long enough for people to see each other clearly. One of the younger deputies suddenly spoke up. "Ma'am, is it true you personally take care of all four of them?" Ava glanced down at the dogs. Her expression softened immediately. "5," she said. "One is asleep inside the house." The deputy laughed softly. Several others smiled. The mood lightened for the first time all afternoon. Harper looked at Rex. The legendary dog sat quietly beside Ava, completely unconcerned with reputations or records. He only cared that the woman he trusted was standing nearby. Somehow that simple loyalty felt more impressive than any commendation Harper had read in the folder. Ava gently scratched behind Rex's ear. "They serve their country," she said. "Now they deserve peace." Nobody argued. Nobody could. The words carried too much truth. The sun continued sinking toward the horizon. The flashing lights had long been turned off. The radios had fallen silent. What remained was a quiet gathering of people who understood that they had witnessed something important. Not a dramatic rescue. Not a heroic speech. Something rarer. A reminder that character often lives where nobody is looking, and that real strength rarely announces itself when it enters a room. The first patrol car pulled away just as the sky began turning gold. One by one, the remaining vehicles followed, their tires rolling quietly down the gravel road until the sound faded into the distance. Soon only two vehicles remained near the farmhouse. Collins's government SUV and Harper's patrol unit. The property felt different now. Larger somehow. Peaceful. The tension that had filled the afternoon seemed to dissolve into the warm evening air. Ava Brooks stood near the fence line watching the horizon. The setting sun stretched ribbons of orange and amber across the Carolina sky. Beside her, the retired dogs rested comfortably after the excitement of the day. Rex lay in the grass with his head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed as a gentle breeze moved through his silvered fur. Somewhere near the barn, a wind chime sang softly. The sound drifted across the property like a quiet farewell. Harper remained near his vehicle for several minutes before finally approaching one last time. He carried the folder Collins had brought earlier. Without a word, he handed it back to Ava. She accepted it carefully. The edges of the papers caught the last rays of sunlight. "Thank you," she said. Harper nodded. "No, ma'am. Thank you." Ava looked at him curiously. Harper glanced toward the dogs. "Today reminded me that there are stories behind people long before we ever meet them." His voice was quieter than it had been all day. "I should have remembered that sooner." Ava considered his words. Then she smiled gently. "Maybe you will next time." Harper returned the smile. It was small but genuine. The kind that comes when someone learns something they know they will never forget. Collins checked his watch and began walking back toward his SUV. Before climbing inside, he looked over the property one final time. The farmhouse, the trees, the dogs, the woman standing among them. He shook his head with quiet admiration. Some heroes never appear on television. Some never stand behind podiums. Some spend their days repairing fences, filling water bowls, and caring for those the world has already moved past. As darkness slowly approached, Harper finally returned to his patrol car. The engine started with a low rumble. He paused for a moment before driving away. Through the windshield, he could see Ava kneeling beside Rex. Her hand rested gently against his shoulder. The old dog leaned slightly toward her touch. Nothing dramatic. Nothing extraordinary. Just trust. The kind that takes years to earn. Harper watched for another second and then quietly pulled onto the road. The patrol car disappeared beyond the trees. Silence returned. True silence. Ava remained outside as the final light of day settled across the fields. The dogs gathered around her naturally, as they always did. One rested beneath the oak tree. Another wandered toward the porch. Rex stayed closest. The horizon darkened. Crickets began their evening song. Far above, the first stars appeared against the deepening blue sky. Ava looked out across the land she had built, protected, and shared with those who depended on her. No cameras recorded the moment. No crowd applauded. There was only the sound of breathing, the whisper of wind through the pines, and the steady presence of loyal companions beside her. The world had finally seen what those dogs already knew. Kindness was not weakness. Quiet strength was still strength. And sometimes the people most deserving of respect are the ones who never ask for it at all.